This is not a video talking about diaries. No. This is a video talking about journals. Yeah, that's right. You are currently watching a retrospective on the Diary of a Wimpy Kid books. This is going to be a series in my channel where I will be reading all 20 books in the series, and I will talk to you guys about them. Mainly, I'm going to talk about the 20 books in the main series as well as the movies. So the idea is to cover 5 books within a video, so there will be 4 videos about the books, and I'm still debating whether or not I should split the videos for the movies. So I'll have one video discussing the original trilogy, and then I'll have another video discussing the reboots, so both the live action and the animated ones. But I'll see how it goes. Depending on how well these videos do as well, I might even do the spin-off books. Who knows? But anyway, let's just focus on the first 5 books at the moment. So kick back, relax, grab some drinks, grab some snacks, and come with me on this journey. Diary of a Wimpy Kid is an illustrated children's novel chronicling the adventures of Greg Heffley as he navigates family, middle school, friendships, overall just growing up. You know, the books are Greg's journal entries, so every anecdote that you read there is told from Greg's perspective. To say the Wimpy Kid series is a cultural phenomenon is an understatement. It is currently the 4th best-selling book series of all time, beating the likes of Twilight and The Hunger Games. Granted, Wimpy Kid has more than 20 books, so it makes sense they sell more copies, but you know, this is still a massive achievement, don't undercut it. The series was initially a webcomic published by the website Funbrain, and daily entries were made between September 2004 and June 2005. Later, the IP was picked up by a publisher and officially published into physical books. As of the posting of this video, the original webcomics are no longer available on the Funbrain website. However, someone did compile all of the entries, and they are available to be downloaded from the Internet Archive if you're ever curious. I'm not going to read the original webcomic, like I just skimmed through it and it seemed pretty much the same as the books. There are some differences between the webcomics and the books, of course, and some of these changes are detailed in the TV tropes page, but I also think that the webcomic is like a pilot thing and that the published books are probably the version that Jeff Kinney would want us to read. So I'm just going to be basing, you know, all my analysis and discussion based on the books. If I'm correct, based on my quick flip through of the webcomic, it seems like it covers mainly the first 3 books. The author of the series is Jeff Kinney. Kinney has been working on this series as far back as 1998. It's not until April 2007 that the first book was published. Jeff Kinney does not only write the books, but he also provides the illustrations too. Oh yeah, we love a multi-talented king! Jeff Kinney is also known for creating the website Poptropica, which is a child-oriented website where kids visit islands and they have to use their problem-solving skills to complete games. I've never used Poptropica. I don't think it was available in Asia back then, but I imagine it might be similar to Club Penguin. As a side note, I guess it is safe to say that these kinds of like children websites are more popular in the past, and it makes me kind of sad because like the current generation don't have websites dedicated to just being places for kids, specifically for kids. Now kids these days have to go to TikTok and Instagram and Facebook. Maybe not really Facebook actually. Anyway, as evident by Jeff Kinney writing the Wimpy Kid books, creating Poptropica, and even some of his initiatives to get like more books to kids, it's safe to say that he's very passionate about kids engaging their brains by either playing productive games or reading. And I have to say that Jeff Kinney really knows his audience and how to reach them. With the Wimpy Kid books, he knows how to write something very entertaining that at the same time doesn't talk down to the young audience. At the same time, the books are still light enough to engage children who might not really enjoy reading in the first place. I would know because I have a very personal connection with this book, which I will talk a little bit later in this video, but just know that I was really into these books when I was a kid. I got into the books around Rodrick Rules, which is the second book, but you bet, whenever there's a new Wimpy Kid book coming out, I am begging my parents to get me those books. Honestly, I am so upset that I lost my Wimpy Kid collection when I moved to Australia. Like, I only have this one, like at the moment, because I bought it on a whim on Big W in my adult age. And yeah, I just miss having the physical books. For this video, I actually borrowed the books from the library. Yay, libraries! And the versions that I read were the bilingual ones. So there's like the English version and the Chinese version. It was fun reading it that way. And it's free, so I can't really complain. This is a reminder to please support your local libraries. Part 1. The books. There are a lot. The most recent book was released as early as October of this year. It's safe to say that at least one Wimpy Kid book will be published each year. For this video, we'll be talking about the first 5 books. The first book is simply titled Diary of a Wimpy Kid, and that was released in April 2007. The second book is called Rodrick Rules, and that was released February 2008. February is my birthday, by the way. Birthday month. The third book, The Last Straw, was released January 2009. The fourth book, Dog Days, was released October 2009. And then the fifth book, The Ugly Truth, was released November 2010. I was debating whether or not I should do like plot summaries for each of the books, but then I was like stumped because it's not like nothing happens in these books, because the thing is like things happen, and things happen like a lot, and they happen in rapid succession. Like there's just so many subplots, and I think that fully recapping what happens will just take a long time. And guys, I just started a new job, which is very good, but that means I don't have time to write, film, edit like 5 book summaries in addition to analysis for like one video. I'm so sorry, guys. I'm so sorry. The best thing I can do is probably talk about like the overarching theme, I suppose, of what each book particularly wants to focus on. In the beginning of each book, on the title page, opposite Greg is usually the person whose relationship with Greg is being explored in that book, or this person is the embodiment of the theme that the book is supposed to talk about. In the first book, the one opposite Greg is Rowley, so the first book is focusing more on their friendship. In the second book, it is Rodrick, because the book is called Rodrick Rules, so it's about their brotherhood. In the third book, The Last Straw, it is Frank, who is Greg's dad, who is opposite of Greg. For the fourth book, Dog Days, it's Greg's mom, Susan, who was opposite him. And for the fifth book, The Ugly Truth, it is Cammy, Greg's great-grandmother. That's so hard to say. Greg's great-grandmother. Okay, that's better. But it's not because Cammy's relationship with Greg is explored a lot in this particular book, but because this book talks about growing up, and it culminates in Greg having the talk with his Cammy about what it means to grow up, and not about like those things. Not about those things. It's about growing up. But even if these books have like these overarching themes, the books still trail off to other stories and subplots, because that's just the nature of life, I guess. In your day-to-day, you don't follow a linear story, right? Sometimes things come up and then you have to take a detour from your, like the main things you've been doing or the main routine that you have. So in a way, it does feel like the books mimic actual journal entries, where Greg just recounts interesting stuff that was happening around him, and some of these stuff comes and goes. Sometimes it comes back, a month later. Sometimes new things come up. It does feel like journal entries in that sense. However, for that reason, when I was reading the book, I do feel like sometimes it is a bit disjointed, and this is something that I think the movies had to work around to make sure that they feel more cohesive than the books. But I do have to remind myself that I'm not really reading these books because I want strong world building or a tight plot or anything like that. I'm reading these books because I want to see what Greg gets up to and what funny stories he has from his school or from his family. This is also why Jeff Kinney can keep writing stories about Greg in middle school. That's right, this series operates with Simpsons logic, where essentially the characters will never grow in age despite having birthdays or going through school years, so Greg will perpetually be in middle school. That is to say, just don't try to make sense of the timeline. Some people tried figuring out which year some of these books take place in, but the dates don't really line up with any calendar year. So continuity or plot, those are not really the priority of these books. Personally, for me, I feel the focus of these books are more on the gags and the characters and the relatability of Greg's middle school experiences. And I think for a lot of the target audience, that's also the point. So even if I feel that the books are sometimes very disjointed, the books were still funny. And if I turn off my brain and commit to just like enjoy the books, they're very entertaining for me. Besides, I don't think that Jeff Kinney sets out to write these books as like scathing commentaries about coming of age, about the American education system, or about complicated family dynamics. These themes are somewhat present in the books, but they are there like very subtly, and Jeff Kinney doesn't really draw too much attention to them. Like, you see how underfunded Greg's school is, and it leads to like funny stories, but these things are not the main focus of the books. Like, they're just part of the reality that Greg lives in, and if you analyze hard enough, that's when you can find these themes. I think Jeff Kinney just wants to write and draw funny books and entertain kids. Or is that the whole intention? Part 2, the characters. Now let's talk about the characters. Greg Heffley is our protagonist. A lot of people might call him a burgeoning sociopath, but I, alongside Wikipedia, call him an anti-hero along the veins of Wolverine, Walter White, and Megamind. I think people are being dramatic when they call Greg a sociopath, because I feel like he's just a preteen. Like, every preteen, middle schooler, they think the world revolves around them. And Greg is exactly that kid. He's misguided for sure. Like, he is lazy, he is shameless, he is dishonest, he is fame hungry, he is money hungry. But again, like, preteens are like this. Like, at some point in your life, I feel like you have some of these traits, but he's still developing and he's still growing and he's still learning what is right or what is wrong. So for that reason, Greg is a fascinating protagonist to me. Something that I wanted to keep in mind when I was rereading these books is the fact that Greg is an unreliable narrator, because this is his journal and everything. But even then, I don't even think I had to remind myself of that fact that much. Even when I was a kid, I was vaguely aware that Greg is an unreliable narrator, because Jeff Kinney shows this through the way that Greg often diminishes people's values in his narration to prop himself up. And Jeff Kinney is very intentional and often shows Greg's hypocrisy. And that's actually where some of the humor comes from. Like, you just know that Greg is in the wrong. And that's why it's so funny. It's just the lack of self-awareness. I think this is a testament to Jeff Kinney's respect for children as an audience. I believe kids will be able to pick up on Greg's excessive awfulness and how that would make him a biased narrator. But something that I picked up on more as an adult, I didn't really realize this when I was reading the books as a kid. Greg is actually a very creative kid. And this creativity is something that no one really bothers to nourish within him, which is, I guess, a bit unfortunate, because I think they just force, the kids to study in one way, whereas, some other kids might need, different styles of teaching, and the teachers don't really acknowledge that. But again, because Greg goes to a public school, so he doesn't get the opportunity to do that, because the teachers might not be, paid enough, and there's not enough resources to be able to do that. Just a thought. Anyway, the reason that I'm saying that Greg is a creative person is just read the books. The fact that he is able to write all these journal entries that are entertaining, clear, and witty, even if he comes across as awful, the fact that he is able to write something entertaining in universe is amazing enough for a kid. He's also a good artist, as evident by the illustrations in his journal. Again, in universe, Greg is the one who illustrates the journals. In his spare time too, he draws comic strips for fun, and he tries to sneak in illustrations as well into his assignments too. Even his comic strip was chosen for the school paper, although it was edited to oblivion, but still, it's still chosen. Anyway, Greg is also creative in other aspects as well. He finds ways to hack his school assignments by fixing up the margins and the font sizes, and he usually finds loopholes around rules, etc. So far, in the first 5 books, no one has really taken Greg under their wing or taught him discipline in regards to his artistic ambitions, if this is even his ambition. Maybe this will happen in future books, or maybe this is something that Greg will encounter in high school or maybe beyond. But still, Greg is lazy. Definitely lazy. Just naturally lazy. For example, sometimes he doesn't even do his chores. In the 3rd book, one of the main plot point is the fact that Greg doesn't want to do his laundry, even when he was running out of clothes. So he was scrambling to find other clothes to wear. Just wash your clothes, man. And when possible, Greg will try to find shortcuts to do tasks, which is understandable, and he's still young, but at some point he has to learn that sometimes you have to put in the hard work and you can't just hack your way through life. But again, he's in middle school, so he doesn't know that yet. He's still growing and maturing. Overall, I really like Greg as a protagonist. Even if he's awful, he's still very entertaining. As a kid, I find him relatable. I'm not crazy. Again, preteens are insane. Yeah. But as an adult, I appreciate the fact that, he is very representative of, young kids in the past. Greg is definitely one of those kids who has a lot of potential if he could overcome his laziness. And I think reading this again as an adult, it's interesting to find that tension, in these books where it's like, Greg, if you apply yourself, you can do it. But he doesn't. And that's where the frustration comes from. Rowley Jefferson is Greg's best friend, and I don't particularly like him. And I feel bad saying that because he is so sweet when he wants to be. But I also don't like the fact that he is so childish. But I think more than anything, he is a product of the way that his parents raised him. His parents are so overprotective and they coddle Rowley so much because he's an only child. But I'm also like, this is annoying. Like, you should let the kid learn. Like, you can't keep protecting him this way. But at the same time, I also understand when his parents don't like Greg because yeah, Greg always gets Rowley into trouble, sometimes even putting Rowley into like physical harm. I think in the books there's about like 2 recorded instances where Greg actually hurts Rowley physically. But it also goes both ways because at some point Rowley accidentally crushed Greg's hand with a hammer, so they hurt each other. But it's an accident and they're boys and they're kids. But I understand why Rowley's parents would hate Greg. I'll give them that. However, again, thinking about how Greg is an unreliable narrator, I feel like some of these aspects of Rowley are presented in an even more negative light, so Greg can present himself as someone better, more mature, more well-adjusted, as some people might say. Something I do like about Rowley is the fact that, yes, while he is incredibly sheltered and he can be spoiled, I like that he marches to the beat of his own drum. Like, he enjoys a pop star aimed for young girls, and he enjoys like more feminine stuff, and he just doesn't care what people thinks. And I think that's admirable, especially as a middle schooler, right? Like, you feel a lot of pressure to fit in, but Rowley doesn't feel that pressure. Like, he just remains true to his own self, and I think that's nice. And I think there's something that a lot of young kids who are reading the books can learn. Like, I actually think that it's very sweet that Rowley just doesn't care and he's just like, this is what I like, so what? So what? But again, because he's still a preteen and he's a middle schooler, there are a lot of moments where he's also very frustrating and I just cannot defend him. For example, he did not credit Greg as a co-creator for this comic strip that they created called Zooey Mama. Granted, at that point, Greg no longer wants to write Zooey Mama comics, but I still think, like, by principle, Rowley should have still given Greg the co-credit. But again, like, they're kids, so they'll make mistakes, and something like this, often happens with kids. Let's just hope that they'll learn eventually when they grow up, which we might not see, but headcanons that they become better people. But just to go off tangent, this is off script by the way, it's just something that I noticed when I was talking about Rowley and the whole Zooey Mama co-creator credit fiasco. Even if Greg is, again, like, very annoying and he sometimes creates his own messes, there are certain instances where you just feel for him because stuff happens to him instead and there's nothing that he can do. And there are some moments where, obviously, like, Greg is the one at fault, but there are often other moments as well where Greg is not at fault at all and he's the one who is forced to kind of deal with the aftermath. And that is one of the other interesting things about these books, I guess, in that Greg causes a lot of his own problems, but at the same time, some things happen to him that he just cannot control and you feel bad for him. There are a lot of moments where you don't like Greg, but then there are a lot of moments where you also feel for him. Rodrick Heffley is Greg's older brother. He is in high school and he is a drummer in a band called Loaded Diaper, spelled in that manner because Rodrick famously do not have good spelling. A lot of people seem to have crushes on Rodrick, mostly because of his actor from the original movies, but I never really thought so much about him as a character, even if he came up with 2 of my favorite gags from the series. The first is when Frank, Greg's father, found out as an adult that his dog was ran over by his own father. Frank got his own family a dog. The dog was later named Sweetheart and his nickname is Sweetie. Rodrick was tasked with getting a bowl with the dog's name on it, and when Rodrick came home, the bowl had Sweaty written on it. And of course, we cannot forget the iconic
"I'm sorry, women."
When Susan found out that Rodrick owned a bunch of like sexy magazines, Susan made him answer a bunch of questions, which essentially boils down to how Rodrick will try to respect women. It culminates in the "I'm sorry, women" gag. This gag is interestingly enough made even funnier in the movies. Like, cinema. Cinema.
A few moments later.
I had to pee, sorry guys. Anyway, I thought that Rodrick and Greg's relationship is portrayed really well. I really like Rodrick Rules as a book. And in that book, I think Jeff Kinney really captured what it means to be a sibling. Just the dynamics of having siblings in general, like it is inevitable for siblings to fight. But at the same time, siblings also have a lot of love and affection for each other when it counts. And Greg and Rodrick perfectly embodied this in Rodrick Rules. Also, something that I realized rereading these books as an adult is, despite the fact that Rodrick, like Greg, is incredibly lazy and self-centered, and he torments and bullies Greg a lot, the same way that Greg also bullies and torments Rowley a lot, I think Rodrick really tries with his drumming career. There are a lot of allusions to how Rodrick really works hard when it comes to his band. Like, he auditions a lot, and he sometimes plays gigs that might not really be ideal for a heavy metal band to play. Like in Dog Days, Loaded Diaper played at a water park at some point, but he's willing to put in that work, and he seems very serious and very dedicated in developing his craft as a drummer. Even Greg acknowledges that Rodrick is a good drummer. In that regard, he's quite similar to Greg in that both of them have creative ambitions, I think, and they are willing to put in the work when it counts. But Rodrick, being more mature because he's like in high school, he's willing to stick with drumming and continue working at it. Whereas with Greg, I think he gets easily bored. So I think as Greg goes older, maybe he might be able to like commit to something and he can like, you know, learn discipline and whatnot. So because of that, since, you know, there's a lot of parallels between Rodrick and Greg, I do think that at some point in the future, Greg would be able to commit to something and learn discipline, and he'll be able to grow beyond just being like this self-centered preteen. Frank Heffley is Greg's dad. For some reason, whenever I'm reading the books, he always comes across as sad. I don't know, it might be the way that Jeff Kinney draws Frank. Side tangent anyway, I actually think that Jeff Kinney is a really talented illustrator. I really love his illustrations. Like, they're so simple, but they're also like so detailed at the same time. It kind of reminds me of the Tintin illustration by Hergé. Is that how you pronounce his name? Hergé? Hergé? Anyway, I do like his illustrations a lot. I love how simple they are, but they're also at the same time so detailed. And I think his drawing perfectly encapsulates the characters and their emotions and the vibe. They really add so much to the books, to the point that sometimes when there's illustrations in books, right, like you can skip it. Whereas sometimes with Jeff Kinney, the jokes are in the illustrations. So you have to really assess the illustrations when you're reading the book. And it just makes it so much more fun. Anyway, I always feel this sense of sadness whenever I look at Frank. And I think it's made even sadder because sometimes Greg makes allusions to how Frank might not be particularly happy with the way that his kids turn out, which I imagine would be a very confronting thing for a kid like Greg himself. Because from the way that Greg writes, Frank makes it known that he's not happy with his kids. And this is where I kind of do not like him at times. He never crossed any lines, but it's just like the way that he carries himself. Like, there's always this air of like disappointment to him. This might be exaggerated because this is what Greg does, right? Like in his journal entries. But it's just the fact that Greg clocks this that makes it kind of sad. I also get this vibe from Frank that he also has a complicated relationship with masculinity. Like, at some point, Greg for Christmas wanted a Barbie dream house because Greg said it might make for a good fort for his toy soldiers, and Frank was very against this idea of getting something girly for Greg. Even when Susan, Greg's mom, was like, it's fine, and it's also fine if he wants to experiment, but it's like, at the same time, it's for his toy soldiers. But Frank ultimately won that argument. There was also this story where at some point Greg really started to enjoy wearing his mom's bathrobe because it's like warm, and Greg said that Frank didn't seem to like that so much. One day Greg couldn't find that bathrobe and he was suspicious that his dad might have donated it. We as the readers don't know if that is true, but who says it didn't actually happen? However, I do agree with Frank that I think Greg really needs discipline. One of the main conflicts in The Last Straw, which is the third book, is that Frank became interested in the idea of sending Greg to a military school. I think this is a bit extreme, but I understand where he's coming from because Greg genuinely is lazy and tactless, and maybe there's a possibility that this, like this really tough love, really hardcore environment can whip Greg up to shape. But at the same time, like, it seems pretty intense. At the end, Greg didn't end up going to military school because Greg ended up, creating an embarrassing moment that saved Frank from having to embarrass himself, because they have a bunch of neighbors who enjoy making videos to submit to like America's Funniest Home Video, and they make people take turns to like make their baby laugh because that's like their reason to record like these funny moments, when in reality they just went to make embarrassing videos. Anyway, Frank was about to go up, and then Greg accidentally flashed people with his Wonder Woman underoos, because let's remember, Greg forgot to do a bunch of his laundry, and so that's the only clean underwear that he has. And so Greg manages to bail Frank out of his predicament, and I feel bad for Greg, but then it ended up being a bonding moment for them, so it's confusing. It's confusing. Susan is Greg's mom, and rereading the books, I actually liked her more in this reread. I think as a kid, I never really cared about the adult characters. Like, I'm just like, where's the kids? I can't relate to any of this. They're so annoying. I hate my parents. But reading these books again in my adult age, like, Susan grew on me because she tries to be a good mother, I think. Of course, she is embarrassing. Like, she forces Greg to do stuff that he doesn't want to. She definitely favors and spoils Manny a lot. And I also don't like the way that she writes parenting columns sometimes, but she makes direct references to Greg or write anecdotes about him. And I get that she wants to add like real life experiences into her columns, but I find this kind of invasive, actually. Like, imagine your mother embarrassing you in front of people on like a newspaper column about parenting, no less. But I do genuinely think that she tries to be a good mother, and there are a lot of moments where I think that she's doing a pretty good job. In the first book, Greg and Rowley decided to become safety patrol students at school, and one of their tasks was to walk kindergarten students home. Rowley was absent during one of the walks, so Greg had to walk the kids alone, but because it rained like the night before or in the morning, a bunch of worms were like on the ground, and then Greg picked up a branch and then like picked up some of the worms, and then he started chasing the kids around, and they were like screaming and yelling, and a lady saw this and mistook Greg for Rowley, and then she tattled to the school. Rowley is torturing these kids and whatnot. So Rowley was fired from the student patrol position, and Greg let Rowley took the fall. However, Greg did feel conflicted about it, and Susan saw this and she tried comforting him, but at the same time she also didn't press for information from Greg, which I appreciated. She just encouraged him to do the right thing, although at the end Greg still let Rowley took the fall. Still, I still appreciated the effort from Susan. Susan also makes more attempts to bond with her kids based on their interests, unlike Frank, who has to wait until his kids share interests with him. She is also considerate about Greg's friendships too, like when Greg had a falling out with Rowley, she tries to get him to bond with other kids so Greg wouldn't feel as lonely. I think overall, Dog Days really shows how much Susan tries as a mother. In that book, Greg mentioned that the family couldn't afford going to the beach for that summer, but when Greg and Rowley were fighting, I think Susan and Rowley's mom tried to make an arrangement where Greg could go to the beach with Rowley's family and Rowley too. So it's like Greg can go to the beach and mend his relationship with Rowley at the same time. And I appreciate the thought that went into this plan, even if it ended up going badly. Nonetheless, there's still thought that went into this plan. Manny, Heffley. I can't stand this demon. I hate him. I hate him so much. I'm kidding. Manny is about 3 years old, so I chalk up his annoyingness to his age. However, I just do not like how Susan and Frank lets Manny get away with a lot of things. I get that he's 3, but if I were to act the way that Manny acts when I was his age, my parents would smack me and then tell me not to One Direction, but to the neighbor that we hate. Whenever I was a kid and I was misbehaving, my parents would always like say that I am not their kid and that I am the neighbor's kid. And I had no idea, but I really hated that. Like, I hated that, and they exploited my weakness, which is mean, which is very mean. Anyway, it's different generations, but I cannot stand that Manny acts this way and that he gets away with acting this way. But again, maybe there are some parts where like it's Greg exaggerating Manny's annoyingness, I guess. But at the same time, I feel like some of these events actually happen as it does. Nonetheless, like given that Manny is still a kid, like I don't think he has that much personality or a lot of things that I can analyze about him. But yeah, he's so annoying. Since we've gone through pretty much the main characters of the series and I've given you my analysis of them, I want to wrap up this part by saying that despite all that, I do enjoy these characters. I appreciate that they are flawed people in the sense that they have good traits, but they also have bad traits and they feel real in that sense. And by that extension, this is again something that I appreciate about Jeff Kinney is that he doesn't talk down to his audience. If you were to talk down to them, I feel like there will be a clear distinction between bad and good characters. But I don't feel that any of these characters fall into the good or the bad category. I still find things to appreciate about the characters, except for Manny. I hate Manny. I'm kidding. Like, even if I hate Manny, I do find him like somewhat entertaining at times. And again, like he's a kid, so I can't really say like he's bad character. You know, he's just like the annoying little brother kid. Anyway, I just don't want to have beef with like a fictional kid. The only thing I have to say is because these books function with the Simpsons logic where the characters will remain the same age forever, I do not think that there's a lot of character development happening. By the next book, any previous developments is just gone and everything is back to the status quo again. I think the idea from the publisher is that like you can pick up any book from the series and then just read it without needing any prior knowledge about the series. And even if there are like references to past events that happen in like the past books, they're not consequential to the plot of the current book. They're just like mentioned passingly. And I don't know how to feel about that because reading the first 5 books back to back, like it's still manageable. I don't feel as frustrated about the characters learning nothing essentially because the characters are still entertaining and charismatic enough. But because there are over 20 books in this series, I'm afraid that at some point I will just get frustrated at the characters and then I'm afraid there will be a lot of flanderization as well. Flanderization on TV tropes is defined as the act of taking a single, often minor action or trait of a character within the work and exaggerating it more and more over time until it completely consumes the character. Most always, the trait/action becomes completely outlandish and it becomes their defining characteristics, turning them into a caricature of their former selves. I think this is bound to happen with the Wimpy Kid books. Again, there's like 20 books in the series. I hope this won't happen, but I'll report back after I read the other books. Part 3, overall thoughts. Not going to lie, I do really enjoy my reread of these books. I think you guys can tell. I still laugh at the gags and stories and characters, and I do think that to some extent, being entertaining is these books' main goal. However, that is not to say that there's no value in this series beyond that. These books are incredibly relatable, especially if you're reading this and you're in middle school, which is when I started reading these books. As a kid, I really enjoyed reading comics and mangas, and I wanted to read novels, but novels are just so intimidating for me. There's just too much words, and my attention span is not good, which is why I really love the fact that these books exist because these books are a perfect balance of having enough text but also having enough illustrations, and these stories are so relatable, so it was easy for me to jump into these books and I don't feel intimidated as well because these books do not require me to know like a whole bunch of world building. It's just slice of life and it's funny and it's got a lot of words, but it's also got a lot of pictures as well. So I feel like these books are a gateway for me to read other books. Without these books, I wouldn't like reading, to be honest. This is what I observed with my other friends at school too. Our English teacher was always trying to get like more students to read books, but the kids are just not interested in reading anything. One day, our English teacher found me and a couple of students like giggling over the Wimpy Kid books, and then he came over to us and then we thought like he was going to confiscate the books, but then he was like, can I borrow one? So our friend lent the teacher the first book and then the teacher read the book like very quickly. He read it in like one period. He came back to us the next day and then he told us, these books books are really good actually. So he borrowed and read the other books, and he also enjoyed them as well. Then he started this crusade. Like, I don't know if this is true or not. Rumor has it, like, he asked the school board to get the Wimpy Kid books for the students because he thought that these books will get more students to read. But the school board was like, no. So our English teacher bought his own copies that he ended up lending to kids, so kids would read. And I think this is what is very good about the Wimpy Kid books, right? Like, they are light enough to engage even the most uninterested readers, but then they can also spark an interest in reading for kids who are interested in reading but feel intimidated with other books. So this book is like a good gateway to kind of get us used to something more long form, and then it sparks further interest in reading for kids like me, who after reading the Wimpy Kid books seek out other books, and that this book led me to reading stuff like The Hunger Games or Divergent, even if Divergent wasn't very good, but it led me to reading other books overall. And going even further, the Wimpy Kid books are what inspired me to be a writer as well. Without these books, I don't think I would be interested in like media analysis or stuff like that. So I owe a lot to the Diary of a Wimpy Kid books, and I understand why this has like a very strong following and why a lot of kids really like these books as well. I also think as well there are interesting points being made by Jeff Kinney in these books about what it means to grow up while navigating public school and complicated family dynamics. These things are more subtle, but they're still there if you wind up analyzing these books like I am doing right now. In the beginning, when I was planning to do a retrospective on these books, right, like, I know that I will have a good time because I do like the books and I think the books still remain funny, but I also thought at the same time I wouldn't have a lot to say apart from the fact that the books are funny. And it turns out I have a lot to say. Furthermore, I know a lot of parents have problems with Greg as a main character, saying that he is a bad influence and a bad role model to kids. These parents even ask for the books to be banned, and I'm like, insane. Very insane behavior. Jeff Kinney even says that Greg is never meant to be a role model, but what he is supposed to be a reflection of what middle schoolers are. Jeff Kinney even pushes back whenever people say that Greg is a sociopath. In an interview, Jeff Kinney said, Greg is recording his life at a time when he shouldn't be recording. It's right when he's not a fully formed person. And I think that people that give Greg a label are sort of missing the joke. Right off the bat, Greg says, one day, when I'm rich and famous, I won't have time to answer people's stupid questions. Whatever that is, I'm not sure how you label that. It's misguided. It's a little bit cocksure, but I don't think it's anything worse than that. I also think, honestly, Greg as a protagonist should invite a lot of interesting conversations, especially for young kids. What I mean by that is it's good to get kids to critically analyze the media they are consuming as young as possible. Why can't we teach kids that Greg is an unreliable narrator who will bend over backwards to paint himself in a good light at the expense of other people within his story? So then, when they are reading these books, kids can start deducing which fact is true and which fact is exaggerated by Greg in his journal entries. I appreciate Jeff Kinney for not spoon-feeding the answers to his young audience, because there's this implicit invitation for kids to discuss the books and think about them beyond just the surface level. You may or may not agree with me, but I would love to know what you think. If you're a Wimpy Kid reader, which book is your favorite? Growing up, I think my favorite was Rodrick Rules, but in my reread, I actually really like Dog Days. I think it's the funniest so far. Let me know what you guys think. Sound off in the comments below, please. Who are your favorite characters too, by the way? And which gags do you think are the funniest? Will your favorite beat I Am Sorry Women and Sweaty? I'll be the judge of that, so let me know. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you like it, please press the like button, share the video, and maybe even comment on it. Like, engage overall, please, guys. And subscribe to the channel too to get updates for the next chapter in this Diary of a Wimpy Kid retrospective, and for other video essays as well, because I do them too. Yeah. Subscribe, please. Subscribe and like the video, please. Anyway, goodbye and have a good day.